Hello and welcome to today's webinar, where today, of course, we're talking about how to make yourself investable in 2022. And the reason that that's so important is obviously with so much opportunity out there in the marketplace, as we sit here, right now, with Class E, Class MA, Class G, the new Super Class G, all these kind of great opportunities that are out there. Most developers and most investors will ultimately run out of cash quicker than the number of opportunities they can find. And so making ourselves investable and being able to raise private finance at the moment is so crucially important. So to help me work out how we do all of this, I have, of course, invited none other than, of course, Mark Stokes. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm very well, Paul. Very well. Yourself?
Very good. Yes, well, I'm a bit croaky, and I think you're a bit croaky as well, aren't you? So we've got a bit of a croaky panel here today, unfortunately. But
Yeah, Paul. I
yes,
was thinking about that, Paul. We can't really mention man flu on International Women's Day, can we?
no, quite, absolutely. My wife thinks I'm being very brave, to be fair to her. So of course, I invited Mark. So people that don't know Mark, so Mark is, of course, an investor, a developer. He's an author, SaaS trustee. He's also a trainer and mentor as well. And so he's got rather a lot going on at the moment. I suppose, Mark, for people that don't know you, can I perhaps just sort of ask you a little question as to sort of why, with sort of so much going on, why you sort of move into training and mentoring? Kind of what made you set up Equa Academy in the first place?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for inviting me on the webinar, of course, Paul. So I retired from corporate life in 2015, and that was after 25 years of running a billion plus of global infrastructure around many countries. And I led teams for 20 of those 25 years. And in doing that, I've now been mentoring for 23 years. I've been a non-exec director for 15 years. So it's just part of everything I've always done, to be honest, cultivating, nurturing great talent to achieve things out with of their expectations. And that's been a real joy for me as well. So it was just a natural transition to continue that outside of corporate life once I'd retired. But of course, I never really wanted to retire. It was throwing the shackles from corporate life and creating those multi-generational businesses that we all enjoy.
Amazing. Well, let's jump into it, shall we? Let's look at kind of some of those kind of key principles about being investable in 2022, shall we?
Yeah, shall I show some slides?
Yeah, please, if you can. There we go. Yeah. There
How's
we go.
that?
Lovely. Yeah, beautiful.
Okay, so how to make yourself investable? That was the exam question you asked me to start. And I've just added the with confidence and compliance, because as you said, it's amazing how many people acknowledge that they need this, but many people feel really uncomfortable, and it shouldn't actually be that way. So, my presentation today and our discussions will be about how to make yourself investable on your own terms, that's comfortable for you. So maybe we'll dive in.
Let's go for it. Yeah.
I've worked for, as I say, 25 years in 33 countries. And a lot of that has been as a client to the construction industry or in the construction industry. And what I've seen over those years is that behavior of, if I want to make more profit, you're going to take less, far away from a win-win relationship. And I've always been against that type of culture. So for the last 20 years, I've been a massive proponent of creating shared value. And if I explain what creating shared value means to our Equa organization, I think it'll add a little bit of color to how it can help other people as well. So firstly, how are we creating that value? Well, we're creating it absolutely for our teams, ourselves, our stakeholders. We are a business after all, and we have shareholder interests to look after. Our funding partners, whether they be bank finance partners, private investors, and we'll come on to that in a short while. Our counterparties under contract, they could be vendors, agents, tenants. Our contracting supply chain of all the trades, it could be a main contractor and indeed their flow down supply chain. And of course, our professional team as well. and then also the social impact and the impact in the local neighbourhood of our operations. If we get the strategy right, there is no reason why all parties can't win. And I would suggest to you that's what we want. There's not many organisations I know who want to do something once and once only. It's about that evolution. So everything we talk about strategically in our wider range and diverse series of businesses is about that principle of creating shared value. Here's an example, a case study of Weybrook House. This was a permitted development scheme in Godalming, actually, just outside of Guildford in Surrey, about 10 minutes that way from my house. GDV of about just under 5.3 million. This is a 10,000 square foot disused office. This had been disused, Paul. Can you believe it? In the heart of Surrey 3 years ago, it had been disused for 12 years. The only thing in 10,000 square foot was two fiber optic racks, 600 by 600 footprint racks. But when you dig deeper, of course, the reality is somewhat different when you look at interconnecting companies. So really, a moral of the story is understand the vendor's situation here. But we constructed this development, did a complete refurbishment, and turned just over 10,000 square foot of B1A office space into 22 apartments, and we still hold 3 of those apartments to date. We brought private capital in on a profit share basis there, so they had shareholding in the special purpose vehicle, the development company, and we enjoyed sharing the profits with those investors. And there's a few other case studies which show different variety of ways that you can engage with private investors. Just a little bit about myself. Over the 30 years, myself and also my business partner since 1998, Nigel Green, we've undertaken around about 3.5 million square foot of commercial property, power stations, data centres. You see some of the global networks that we've been involved in, Europe, Asia Pac. In fact, top right was the first development, which was that's Lock and Dam number 16 in Mississippi, Muscatine, Iowa, on the Mississippi, where we, that was a boy's annual story, one for another day, Paul, but dynamite, concrete, minus 40 degrees in the vast Mississippi in midwinter. And the contract start date and finish date was when the ice froze, so the grain barges couldn't come down, to when the ice melted. So I'm not sure how you'd put that one in a JCT contract these days, but that was back in 1992.
Impressive.
So I've been involved in business startups, mergers, acquisitions. I've sold businesses, I've led businesses through transformation, and I've been a corporate troubleshooter as well as a board director, non-exec. So it qualifies me not to know everything by a long shot. I learn every single day. I think humility is one of the strongest strengths to have in business. But I've seen a lot of things in my life, and helps me shape and craft the strategies which are meaningful to us and our partners. And to give a little bit of background, I've written 5 books. So intellectual property is an asset class that I'm very heavily invested in. And we also have our EQRA IDA deal analysis system. We've got strategic investments in various businesses. We've done many commercial to residential conversions and new land builds. So we're heavily involved in developments. We've also acquired a lot of commercial units as well, many of which we hold. In fact, we hold 6 of those in our SAS pension alone. We've got quite a lot of HMOs, about 150, just over 150 rooms. Don't really talk about those a great deal. They're fairly set and forget. And a lot of single lets as well. We love single lets, to be honest. We don't often buy them, we create them, and then we hold them. That's how we create that wedge of equity. And who are we in summary? Well, we're business owners, SAS trustees, developers, investors, mentors, and both Nigel and I are dads to 4 great kids each. So that's a bit of us. There's some of our developments, some of the GDVs there. So ranging from, $1 million plus through to about 20 million. each and every one of those requires the support of our fantastic investors in one way, shape or another, in different forms, different investors, different appetites to risk and return. But intrinsically, if you can create an environment of trust where you can attract great people who understand creation of shared value, it's absolutely phenomenal what you can achieve. And it's around about just over 30 million that we have secured and in many cases already paid back as well. And in some cases, 3 or 4 times over. I want to start with a quote from Sir Frank Williams. Sadly, passed away very recently, a real loss to motorsport and to entrepreneurship as well. Sir Frank, many of you who know me well will have heard me use this quote, does it make your car go faster? Now, there was a guy who absolutely knew with laser-like clarity exactly what his strategy was, why he was doing it. If somebody put a requisition or a purchase order or an invoice in front of him for signature, does this make my car go faster? And I'd like everybody on this webinar, and we challenge ourselves every day, everything we do, that return on time employed, does it make your car go faster? Well, of course, you need to know what you're expecting of that car. In Frank's case, he knew that car had to go faster around the track over the course of an entire Grand Prix than any other car. So we need to understand what our vision, what our drive, what our targets and goals are. And we need to know what we refer to as our economic equation. And this might seem a very strange place to start, but when you start a business, your private investors don't come first because, quite frankly, they don't exist yet. You haven't attracted them to understand your business. So it always starts with you, has to start with you. What are you trying to achieve? What puts tea on the table for you? Are you trying to create a legacy of assets? Are you trying to build capital, cash flow, equity? Start with the end in mind when you're planning. And if you answer these questions with clarity in your own mind, then this will just ooze out of every pore when you're talking with potential investors and suitors. We always have an approach where we make money on the way in. We're not big risk takers. We want to commute risk. So we're looking at full conditionality on offers or option agreements. So we're always trying to capitalize on the creation of the money on the way in. We might crystallize the cash flow of that on the way out, but we're creating the value, that equity wedge on the way in. So that question of what is your economic equation? How do you earn, invest, protect, and create that dynamic wheel? And that's hugely important there. We can see the F1 car, the cockpit view there. You've got to know where you're going with absolute clarity. And having these 2 pictures here as your wing mirrors, looking back and looking forward, incredibly important in life. Love Formula One, love the high performance culture, Paul. So you'll have to excuse me. There's going to be a whole load more slides here with
what we expect, Mark. What we expect.
Here's Ironbridge House, just under 20 million, 19.5 million GDV. Some great CGIs there. And, we acquired this building 2 months after the first lockdown, right in the heart of the COVID phenomena. And it's pretty tough getting that one started. But here we are, just under 2 years, and we will be complete at the end of April. So it's been a phenomenal project, moved at a huge pace. Where we are the main contractor on that one. Equa Projects is the main contractor there, and we've got great investors there, fixed interest and equity options there for those larger projects, which is something that you can decide what is right for you. But I'm always a proponent of transparency of risk. It's hugely important. And the 4 key elements of risk: firstly, you've got to be aware enough to understand and identify what risk looks like. Secondly, mitigating risk, transferring risk. And then what you can't transfer or mitigate, you have to be able to manage. And that comes with having a fantastic team. And here we've got Romain Grosjean at the Bahrain Grand Prix. I think everybody's blood went cold on that Sunday afternoon when we saw those tragic events unfold, and then that miraculous man walking out of the fire. I've been a troubleshooter for 20 odd years, and I've been an independent investigator on 2 fatalities, and it's not a pleasant place to be. And in the world of construction, if you get that wrong, then somebody may well not walk out of those flames. So, not to put a downer on it, but we're in big boys games, big boys rules here, and we have to understand risk. And when you're working with potential investors, be open with them, be transparent, discuss risk. And I quite often find myself hearing myself say the words to an investor. If a potential investor hasn't asked me what I would consider some of the rigorous questions and lines, I might hear myself saying, I was only with an investor the other day, and just a couple of points that we were discussing on the risks in a development. Might be construction costs, might be GDV, but just subtly and diplomatically drawing themselves into that conversation of risk. I think it's the right thing to do. In fact, I know it's the right thing to do, that all parties are eyes wide open. So that might not be the most inspirational slide, but actually it's probably the most important here, that people truly understand what risk looks like, and therefore they can make that decision on what the risk versus return looks like.
I mean, just to add to that, Mark, I mean, investors, yes, want to know this, but also kind of the bank wants to know it as well. And if you haven't thought about it and can't clearly present what those risks are and how you're going to manage them and how you're going to, what the impact of those might be on that project, then before you start, you're not building the credibility that you need going forward. It just undermines what you're up to. Everybody knows there's risk. It's just a question of what is it and what are you going to do about it and what impact will it have. And off the back of that, it's quite simple, isn't it?
Exactly that. How are you best able to identify the risk and mitigate those risks? And that's a great opportunity to explain your professional team. I don't think people would invest in one of our developments if it was just Mark Stokes trying really hard. I might have 30 years of experience. That's great, but I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. So, and I did lose a dear business partner, Pete, over 5 years ago. So I understand, the impact that can have on a business. So, standing on the shoulders of giants, understanding how professional indemnity insurance, we call it that risk assurance framework of having strong contracts to counterparties for clarity of delivery. And let's face it, Paul, they're far better at doing all those architectural CDM, all those elements than we ever will be. Our skill is to draw them together from a leadership perspective. So there's a roadmap of all the risks. I mean, there are a whole lot more potential that need to be navigated and are inherent in your economic model. I do want to focus on just top left, that one there, cash flow. It's one that we have around about 10 to 11 layers of contingency in any of our developments. And the one I see frequently, I think many people, when they hear the word contingency, they think of, okay, that's 5, 10, 12% on build cost. But we have 10 or 11 layers of contingency in different areas in terms of time, but in terms of cash flow as well. Cash flow will take most businesses down very, very quickly if you're not careful. So having contingency of cash flow, as you said, is something that the banks want to see, and it's proper governance from the board of directors. So, and again, you can share this with investors, so investors understand that. Many investors might be investors now, but would like to do their own developments in the future. So, it's imparting that knowledge so that they can be great custodians of their own schemes in future years. And so that baton change continues. This development we're just about to start in Runfold in Surrey. There's 9 new build houses, about 5 million GDV. And the private capital on that came in on a fixed interest loan agreements with a second charge. So let's have a look at some clearly there are lots of steps to investability, but if we summarize these in terms of 7 key steps. Firstly, it's creating that identity, building that identity. What are you about? That confidence of what makes you tick, your passion, your belief, your vision, what you're trying to achieve, encapsulating that into a brand, into a clarity of identity. All high performance cultures have that identity absolutely nailed on. Once you have that and are evolving that, then increasing that profile. Now, you don't necessarily need to be that influencer with a million hits on YouTube or Instagram. It's all relevant to your particular strategy. If your strategy is to do 1 buy-to-let every year for the next 10 years, you might just need half a dozen people to talk to. If you're looking at doing developments of 10, 20, 30 million, of course, you might need a lot wider audience there. So it's increasing your profile appropriate to your strategic objectives. It always comes down to personal trust. Can you create that personal trust and resonance with your audience? Nobody is going to invest in your deal, in your business, if they first of all don't trust you. So do you resonate? How do you create that resonance? And investors are people. They've all got their own personalities. They've all got their own risk appetites. They've all got their own view on return and diversification. They're all very different, and we should treat them very differently. As that's the respectful way. So creating that personal trust, you're not going to please everybody, and nor should you try, because we all come from different angles. We've all got different backgrounds, but creating that personal trust is number one. Secondly, then that business credibility. If you pass stage 1, then they'll want to know, okay, well, what is your business? What does your business do? And many investors have made their money through business, the business of life. And they're fascinating people, absolutely fascinating people. That's I run our investor relations program, and I have the joy of spending so much time with highly successful, motivated people who I want to understand, their background, how they made their money, their businesses, the challenges they overcome. And many miss that. And I could have many coffees with people there, and they're not asking me any questions. But eventually, they might ask that question of, okay, what do you do, Mark? How can we work together? What does your business do? So I'm learning all the time, fascinating conversations, and I'm never asking for money. I have to be honest, Paul. And I'm sure there's quite a few exceptions, but in my experience over fundraising for many, many years and business, money generally doesn't talk. And that might seem completely the opposite end to what many people think. I would say 60% of all of our investors don't have social media accounts. You would walk past them every day of the week in the road. They don't feel the need to brag. And actually that kind of really resonates with me. So that business credibility and that connection is the next after personal trust. And of course, when one's comfortable with the business, then what are those opportunities that unfurl from that through attractive investment? And that might be through whether you're raising money for a business expansion, could be through a property development or a property investment of one description or another. Once an investment has closed and we're up and running, then constant communication throughout the entire process. No surprises, that should be the mantra. Really engaging, understanding who they are, site visits, updates, discussions. Granted, site visits haven't been easy over the last 2 years. And then that question to you and your board and to your investors about scale and evolution. It's that pause for thought at the end of a cycle. How did that go? How did everybody feel about this? Is there another chance to invest? What is that opportunity? At what level? What have we learned? What could we do better? that critique, that constructive feedback, really important. Some of our greatest, I'll say, tweaks, our greatest evolution in some of our documentation and things have actually come from direct feedback from investors. They want to be involved. And when you send the next investment memorandum to an investor, as I did once, and the investor came straight back and said, "Look, page 6, that's really interesting. We discussed that, didn't we?" I said, "Yeah, I did." I took that to the board and we thought that was an absolutely cracking idea. And so we slightly changed our model there, and really thank you for that feedback. They felt invested in our business then. They felt listened to. And that's really important. This is from one of our corporate brochure, actually. I mentioned about standing on the shoulders of giants. Look, you're not going to be doing a development of any particular scale on your own. You rely on expertise. That could be a planning consultant, could be architect, structural engineer, the valuers, your accountants, tax advisors, your asset management team, banking, private investors. It requires an overall team effort, and most people absolutely get that. And on a recent new build development of ours, we added up the expertise of all the people that have been involved, and it was around about 2,000 people years of industry experience brought to bear on our project, which I thought was pretty incredible.
Absolutely.
We have our property developers and investors LinkedIn and Facebook group. Please feel free to join there. And we've also got our property developers and investors podcast, which we release on a regular basis. So tune in and listen to more very specific subjects like this on development and investment. I do like a timeline, Paul. It's nice to actually pin the information into a sequential series of events and put an order to it. So a little bit of a give back here in terms of the primary activities, core activities, and other activities of a typical development. We run through this in a lot more detail in other parts of our business, but the heads of terms, the exchange of contracts, legal completion, then the design and procurement phase. And then, of course, we're into the construction phase, and then the sales completion, and then finally into the investor returns and closing the SPV, if indeed it is an SPV. I've just highlighted the end section there. Excuse me. What I find is that because I'm a business investor as well, I get a lot of investment memorandums come across my desk, and many of the deal structures, they'll show me how to get into a deal, but they won't show me the process and the order of events of walking me out of the deal. How do I get my money back? How do I get my capital back and my returns? So it's a strong suggestion that that's a key part of your investment memorandum and possibly even part of your corporate brochure, so people understand exactly the ground they stand on, the order of events, the security, the charges, and where they sit compared to the banks, etc. Here's another example. This again is a second charge, fixed interest, GDV of about 3 million. This is in Cambridgeshire, and this is a relatively small plot of land, a lovely scheme, and that's new build of 8 houses. And we'll be keeping those 8, I suspect, for many years to come. So that's, I do find it fascinating, the quality of CGIs over the years, Paul. I mean, you've seen many. It's amazing, isn't it? Where will CGI technology be in 5 years' time? It'll just be incredible. The promise model. So when engaging with raising private capital, there are certain things that must underpin the credibility and professionalism, in my humble opinion, and they've certainly help us create a robust system which is supportive yet very clear and legally compliant. So I'll just take you through these very briefly. So P, the process, there has to be a defined process. This could be a process within your governance. It could be a process which is compliant to your investors. So think if your investor is a trust or a SAS pension or offshore, there'll be certain compliance things that your process needs to take into account should it embrace those types of investors. What are the returns? Clarity on those returns. Are the returns securitized? Are they fixed? Is it a fixed interest? Is it a loan note? Is it a loan agreement? Is it equity? Is it a profit share? Are there clear timelines there? So we have an investment in a virtual reality company, which is a bit random, but we know quite a number of footballers who are supporting that scheme. So we did a SaaS investment into a virtual reality company, relatively small compared to some of the other investments that we make, but the returns aren't guaranteed, and we're shareholders in that business. And once that business is restructured or sold, then we will get our return. So it's not a 2-year loan agreement. So understanding what returns work for you. And it starts with you. Yes, those returns and your structure needs to be attractive enough to drive the interest or draw the interest in from investors. There's no point in saying you'll get personal guarantees and 2% per annum. You probably won't get a great deal of interest if you're trying to raise £2 million. Equally, you don't want to be massively oversubscribed because you might have given too much cost of capital away. So it's finding, again, that balance that works for you. You know, the scheme comes first, but you've got to make it attractive enough to give you the sound possibility of raising the amount of funds there. Options, not purchase options. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about options on raising the investment. So if you're having a conversation with somebody over a coffee, they're a self-certified high net worth individual, so you can start to discuss some of the options you have available, and they say quite clearly that they're not interested in equity or profit share, purely on a loan agreement. Well, if you were looking for equity, that's a pretty short conversation. So have you got a couple of options there? Maybe one with a profit share, one with a loan agreement. You don't have to, but it's just understanding that different investors have a different risk profile. And you may find that some investors will work at all ends. They'll work at, they'll hedge the market, they'll be in gold, they'll be at bond level returns. Some of them will be at loan returns at 8, 10, 12%, and some will have a proportion as well in equities or profit share.
And I guess, well, you can find out what they're interested in by quite simply asking them. It's as you're having those early discussions over a cup of coffee, it's kind of what sort of stuff you elsewhere and what sort of stuff do you like and what do you like about those things. And I suppose one of the things that I often talk about in these webinars is that pre-qualification, in effect, those discussions that you're having, which is part of the pre-qualification of whether they're right for you and whether you're right for them. And of course, as they're answering those questions, if you can be making a note of those things, then of course, when you put that presentation forward to them and you put it in line with what they've already told you they're interested in, the chances of them accepting it are much, much higher than if you just try and, whilst they've said they want this, you try and force that at them, the chances of you actually accepting that are very slim.
I totally agree. You know, we were born with 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and nobody likes to be spoken to. People like to be valued and listened to. And my business partner, Nigel, has a great question. He'll ask the question, what does great look like to you? What's your bottle? What are you looking for? What are you looking to achieve? And you know what, if we're there with a sniper rifle with a red dot on the forehead, in the crosshairs, thinking, are they good for a few quid? It's no way to live your life. In fact, you might miss the opportunity to do a collaboration on a business to business level if you're just thinking somebody is a potential investor. So I can honestly say over 30 years, I've never had a coffee with a potential investor. I've had plenty of coffees, but they've always been with a fellow member of the human race. And we explore what makes all of us tick. That's great. We need to have a model. If somebody is interested and they want to go to the next level, what does that model look like? We have a very clear model in terms of compliance. There's the self-certification, high net worth, sophisticated investor. There's the KYC process, the AML process as a flow chart, which then guides through the various stages of compliance. Becoming investable. Well, this is all part of becoming investable, but this would be the collateral that supports that. This would be about the mindset. This would be about the focus, the compliance, and the confidence in the overall model and the delivery and the approach. And this is very much bespoke to who you are, not who Paul is, not who I am, but it's got to be your model. And that's where I work with people exclusively to help them shape the model that works for them. This should always be one of the top topics in your discussion when you're working out your economic equation. A lot of people will focus on returns, but security should be right up there. Security. It's about that focus of return of the capital. If you look at all the Benjamin Graham, Warren Buffett, these guys, it's preserve your capital. That's what you've got to focus on. So it's a very personal relationship when you're working with a private investor and they come on board. I take it particularly personally. Whether there are personal guarantees or not is kind of irrelevant, really. It is a huge duty of care and responsibility. That money, it might have come from a person, an LLP, a business, a SAS, a trust offshore, but that is somebody's hard-earned capital, and it needs to be treated with a massive amount of respect and shown that courtesy. And there's the engagement. How do you create that rapport? How do you do the updates, the communications? How do you turn it into a real experience? Now, some investors don't want that. We have some investors who, quite frankly, don't want us to darken their door for 2 years. They just trust us with the money and don't talk to us anymore. We're fine. We will still give them updates every month, whether they ask for it or not, because I want to lay that audit trail that, we're beyond reproach. We're always communicating, always updating, once a month, once a quarter, and everybody is eyes wide open. But most people love that. They love a few slides every now and again, or financial updates, or being able to reach out. And I always give my mobile number out, my personal email address out. If anybody's got a concern, I want them to phone me. If you've got a concern, got a query, or just phone me. We'll have a chat, have a catch up, have a coffee. It's great. You want those connection points. And if there's a perception starts to stew, you can knock it on the head really quickly and replace perception with fact. Or if there is a problem, then you can correct it and put it right. And then D in the promise model is draw. How do you create that draw, that attraction? What attracts you? Well, many of you may know me for some of my books on commercial to residential conversion or SaaS pensions, for our event that we do and our mastermind at Mercedes-Benz World, Brooklands and the Brooklands Property Grand Prix. Yeah, that's a kind of a hallmark of who Nigel and I are and what we do, as well as being developers. So what is the draw that you can create? It doesn't have to be on a massive scale. It could be everything from a newsletter to ebooks to, you find your way, but it's creating that draw, that attracting the right type of people to you for interesting conversations. Here's a gentleman who certainly wears his heart on his sleeve, and what he does is heartfelt, whether you agree with him or not. He establishes the right approach for him, and I would encourage you to establish your approach that supports your values. That's where the belief oozes out of every pore, and you truly understand who you are. People get who you are. You're not trying to please everybody. That's no way to live your life. Don't try and please all the people all the time. People generally don't want you to agree with what they're doing. They want to understand who you are, and if there is a bit of debate there, then that's fantastic. You will not please all the people all the time. Doesn't mean you have to fall out with people. I don't really get all this haters thing. That's not for me. Just mutual respect for everybody you meet. And if it doesn't work, then that's absolutely fine. I think great collateral always creates real impact, and it backs up the spoken word in writing. So this is just a content sheet of our corporate brochure. It explains who we are, our ethos, our investors. It's clearly targeted towards investors, our environmental, social and governance, our approach, high performance real estate. That's what we've been involved in for 100 million investments and all the developments we've done over 30 years. So it's creating that inspirational collateral. And in fact, if anybody does want a link to a video that I did on creating great collateral, creating a great brochure, I'm very happy to send people a link. Paul, maybe if people just put something in the chat box, send me a brochure.
We'll get that sent through to him.
Very happy to send that over to them. So where can you find investors? Now, this is a scene from the back of a room at Brooklands, where we had 312 people there in November. We've got our next session this Thursday at Brooklands Property Grand Prix at Mercedes-Benz World. So the answer to the question is anywhere and everywhere. As I mentioned, in my experience, money doesn't talk. There'll be the few people who stand behind the supercars, or maybe even stand behind somebody else's supercar, and try and get that rapport. But great people. They're generally family people. The privilege of being successful and having funds gives them freedom of choice. And generally, freedom of choice isn't being flashy in my experience. So they're walking up and down your village, your town, your city all the time. They're in your communities. I'm chairman of our local scout group, and there's some wonderful people there, very influential people. But you're not trying to find the money. You're just trying to be and enjoy your life with great friendships and great groups of people, interesting people who have been successful. And it's about playing the long game as well. Not going straight for the money. It's not the money shot here. It's actually creating those relationships of friendships, professional, associate relationships in business, they will mature over time. If you're clear on what your vision is, then and how you do things, your why, your passion will just radiate. Everybody will see it as infectious. It might not be for them, but they'll understand your passion. I've always said to my children, Paul, I wanted two things from them. I wanted a great work ethic, and I would love them to be passionate about something. I don't care what it is. Could be fishing, could be netball, could be crochet. It really doesn't matter what it is, but just be passionate about something and have that strong work ethic to back up that commitment. And I think the combination of those two things will serve them well in life.
Yeah, totally agree.
So being clear on what your model is, having the confidence to hold your own thought, understand what you're about. You're comfortable in your own skin, a bit like the dating game. It's in dating somebody, that confidence of somebody confident in their own skin is really quite appealing. If it goes too far, it becomes arrogance, and of course that's certainly not a good look. Having that confidence, and the H word I used earlier on, one of the strongest things in business is humility, knowing that there's always room to grow, improve, and evolve, and that keeps people grounded. I mentioned created shared value. You can see this is the river that runs through everything. It's creating that win-win for everybody, which creates the appetite to go again and again and again. And do what you love. Paul and I were having a chat the other day, and I had a chat with somebody probably a couple of months ago, and they were struggling to find investors. And I said, well, where have you been looking? And they said, well, I've joined a boat club and I've joined a golf club. I said, well, do you like sailing and do you like golf? And they said, no. Well, it's I'm sure that kind of radiates a bit, really. So, find something you love. People are around all over the place, in every walk of life. But investors are people. They're not investors. They're actually real people. Real people who work really hard for every red cent of what they have. Be respectful. Don't overlook some of their concerns, what their objectives and visions are. And of course, you can find investors at Brooklands. Brooklands is one of those anywhere and everywhere. There are tens of millions of pounds of investment in the room at Brooklands all the time. I know who they are. It's for you to reach out in whatever connection you feel in your environment to get to know people. They might have personal wealth. They might have retained profits in a company. They might have a SAS pension. They could have funds in another trust, in an LLP, all different ways, shapes, and forms. So walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. Understand what life looks like from their perspective. This is a piece of advice given to me by one of my first managing directors. He's now a billionaire. His name's David McCourt. David McCourt employed me straight out of university, or Polytechnic, Paul. I really am that old. In 1992, and David McCourt is a telecommunications magnate. He employed me as the first employee in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, to lead the charge on data centers and fiber and cable networks in the UK and Europe. And we were involved in tens of millions of contract negotiations. And he said, look, this will serve you well for the rest of your life. Walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. Try and find the common ground, and bring everybody along with you. And it's not always possible, but that has really come to fruition time and time again in my career. And so it is for investors. There are a number of what does great look like questions that an investor may be pondering. And unless you ask those questions, you won't know. Certainly, an investor is looking for the return of their investment. Preserve your capital, as Mr. Buffett says. You must get that return of capital, and you must be highly respectful if you're a developer or attracting investment. That's key. Then there's a return on their investment over term. Again, that depends on risk appetite. Are they looking for a fixed return? Are they looking for a variable return, a profit share? A return on intellect. Can they learn something along the way? Learn something out of interest or learn something out of necessity? Because they might want to be a developer in the future, or they might see certain skills you've got that could be transferable. I've mentioned the return of social impact. I would say the demographic of many of our investors is from 40 to 60. That would be the bell curve. That would be where 90% of our investors are. So between 40 to 60, you can imagine a very substantial amount of them have seen a lot of the world. They've been successful in business and life. They've got kids. Some have maybe even got grandchildren. And believe it or not, they actually care about the environment, the planet, and the impact. So it's really important for them to not only create a return on their investment, but actually to create, stimulate a social return, a social impact return. So having that impact investing feel to your development, which is backed up with credibility, not greenwashing, but that's really important to many people. They don't want to make a return at the expense of others. They want to make a return through the enablement of great social progression. Then there's return of interaction. Look, when you're running a business, and many of the investors I know have made their money by leading businesses to a sale. But when you're a business leader, it can be a lonely world. We know many of us listening here as entrepreneurs, it can be lonely. So having that return of an interaction, that social interaction, particularly when it's a community like our property developers and investors, where it's a community that challenges tradition. You know, when I left corporate life, I didn't know what a SAS pension was in 2014, 2015. Had to work that out. I'm certainly glad I did. It worked for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but certainly did work for me. So, you know, how to challenge tradition, always trying to be that little bit better tomorrow than you were yesterday. And then a return on inspiration. I'll come to that in a second, but I don't want to leave this slide without highlighting that return of investment. So whether you're an investor, which I am, that's absolutely clear for me. If you're looking to have a conversation with potential investors, again, you need to be massively respectful of that. This comes with a serious amount of duty of care. And if you can step up to the plate, it's an absolutely wonderful environment where you can create that shared value. So these are some of the areas that we create that return on inspiration. We've got books on supporting the next generation. We've got our Echo Academy community, some books that have written. We've got SAS Alliance in terms of thought leadership. We've got our own SAS, and we openly share with people what we're doing in our SAS. We're helping to alleviate street homelessness. In fact, we've just exchanged in Cornerstone Place on another commercial property this week. So by the end of March, we will have had under contract commercial property and long-term contracts varying between 5 and 70 years that will enable 2 million homeless bed nights to help alleviate street homelessness. Real, you know, getting really into the barbs of deep societal challenges and problems. We've got our Earn and Learn program, our Equa collaboration, where we invest in businesses and collaborate, and of course our mentorship and mastermind. So there's a few areas there of particular support. It would be inappropriate of me not to pause on compliance, and I call it bank grade due diligence. Some might not like the bank grade, but I think it sets that tone that unless you pass the hurdles of the bank, and private investors deserve exactly the same level of due diligence and scrutiny as a bank does. So compliance and the best, most appropriate industry leading standards are key. And clearly that would be defined by the FCA 13.3, making sure you understand the compliance requirements there. KYC, know your customer, and AML, anti-money laundering. We tend to use we do use a legal practice and also another quasi-legal practice that supports the administration here, which enables that strong governance. Important to understand where the origination of funds comes from, whether it's personal or offshore, LLP, company. There'll be different applications there. I mean, if it's a fixed loan and it's from personal, you'll have to withhold interest. Now you need to manage that expectation with the investor, be open, and the time for that is right at the front of the relationship, not at the end. So there are just different areas in that process. If you're working with people who have a SAS pension, again, that can have some different vagaries there, very, very specific compliance issues. You need to be very aware of that. Okay, it's very topical at the moment, and this is people's pensions they're dealing with. Okay, and that's a different level of respect. It really is. So do be aware of that. So I'm just going to repeat that: strong duty of care and the reputation. You're dealing with people's confidence, their reputation. You know, just because they've signed self-certified high net worth or sophisticated investors, you will still get a whole wide range of people who have signed, but do they really understand? I believe it's the right responsibility to take people through, you know, the thorny, knotty questions and due diligence to aid them to have an eyes wide open approach to investment. I mentioned environmental, social and governance. I've been involved in ESG programs for 15 years in various organizations. From the environment perspective, we're talking about climate stability, preserving the the planet's natural capital, waste management. From social, we're talking about, you know, IP, human capital, diversification, equality, the value chain and that social impact. And then from a governance perspective, you know, anti-money laundering, anti-bribery and corruption, transparency, strong corporate governance, and of course, risk management as well, key elements. And this is supported by the United Nations, it's supported by the European banks, and increasingly, this is becoming part of mainstream banking due diligence. And I believe it should be part of everybody's program as a responsibility to society. And also, if your objective is to raise funds from, you know, banking partners or indeed private investors. So last few slides, I want to just talk about the economic equation. I've mentioned that it starts with you need to understand what your economic equation is. Why are you doing this? So, excuse me. So I thought it might be helpful if I shared with you what our economic equation is in very simple terms, and having this clarity of understanding. There's lots of layers of detail behind this. This clarity of understanding might help and support you in taking those first and formative steps in building up your rapport and an operating system. So for those starting, you know, it starts with that very first asset. And when you've got the first asset, you've got to put that asset in, number one, the right structure, tax efficiency, shareholding, ownership, all absolutely clear. When I was in corporate life, how do I make more money? Well, I need a promotion. It was all about my silo. But now we have 6 silos. I've got 4 children, my wife and I. We've got 6 silos, 6 shareholders, 6 different lots of dividends if we want them, 6 different lots of pension contributions. Can you see it's the tax efficiency play is really important here. So getting the right structure. Of course, once we're in that right structure, the asset throws off cash flow. Now we want that cash flow to be tax efficient. So in order to be tax efficient, we might choose to have a SAS pension, we do. And that SAS pension can have employee or employer contributions, which saves us corporation tax in our business because that comes in the cost line rather than where dividends might normally sit. The SAS can be split into 2 pots. Ours is, we hold lots of commercial property and we may choose to do third-party unconnected loans. And then the other 50% we choose as a loan back. And that loan back, we can loan back to our sponsoring company, which helps assist us in our constant drive to create a lower cost of capital. And if we create that wheel, that cycle, that will create the scale, and then we can create more assets. So with a SaaS isn't a strategy. A SaaS is part of your overall strategy. It's a damn fine asset in your toolbox. But what we're trying to drive here is, you may have heard the term WACC rate, weighted average cost of capital. So that's the blend of private capital, in your economic equation, and your bank cost of capital. So we want to reduce that lowest cost of capital. So we're going to get the capital from development finance, private investors, and SaaS loan backs. Now, development finance, that might be at 8, 9, 10%, to pick a number. Private capital, you might have that at, say, 10%, 12%. SaaS loan back, as long as you can get the right level of security there, could be as low as 1.5 to 2% per annum. So it really can help drive. And this is that critical thinking analysis that I work with our mentees constantly to help them evolve their economic equation. And I see the weight of the millstone lifting off people's shoulders. They're full of that energy and pent-up enthusiasm and energy to drive forward, but they're not sure on the direction or the roadmap. Having clarity of strategy and the steps of the roadmap moving forward is incredibly powerful. And we run a mastermind, and it's for business owners, investors, people wanting that personal growth possibly in property. I'm very well known for land developments and commercial to residential conversions by many, but we focus in all areas of property. And clearly the due diligence here is underpinned by Nimbus's excellent platform. And Nimbus play a key role here, running table sessions at our mastermind group in a whole array of property strategies on the right-hand side. So our mastermind runs monthly. It's personally hosted by myself and Nigel over a 12-month period. It's face-to-face and also virtual. And we have industry experts. I've mentioned Nimbus and our accountants, our tax advisors, planners. They're all there for those specialist sessions. We also have an investor club as well, which gives the opportunity for people to actually pitch for funds in a very safe environment. All the disclaimers are there to protect everybody, eyes wide open. And there's complimentary access to the Brooklands Property Grand Prix, and also our well-renowned developers program as well. So that's our Equa Mastermind, helps you fund, find, deliver the strategy that's right for you. And there's some examples there. I've got a right old frown in the bottom left-hand corner. I'm obviously right involved in some detailed conversations on raising funds there. And in fact, there's you guys in the top right, Paul, there, Nimbus Maps there, discussing your platform there. So this is our mastermind. I just want to give you access to a very special offer for all the people who are on here today. It's normally $3,995 plus VAT for 12 months, but for the next couple of days, £1,000 off to great people on the webinar here. So $2,995 plus VAT. If you put in that code 14 for 12, and we'll give you 14 months for the price of 12. But look, don't just take my word for it. If you want to have a chat, the QR code on the right-hand side, click on that. They'll take you to my diary. Book some time with me. I'll have a chat with you. Let's get to know each other and see if it's right for you, or indeed our mentorship or other things that we do.
Yes. Great.
So there we go, Paul. I'll pause for breath there. Hopefully that's been supportive of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, Mark. And what we'll do in a moment is we'll we'll launch a poll as well. So if you'd like a follow-up call with Mark, then we can arrange that too as well. And we'll do that in a moment. But I suppose before sort of moving on to sort of the Q&A, what I thought might be useful is for me to kind of just show you a few tricks that perhaps using the Nimbus system we can use to kind of help us on this journey. Kind of a few things that I want to kind of bring to life. So number one is that sort of my experience of private finance has been that investors follow the deals. If you can be tooled up with lots of deals and lots of kind of interesting opportunities, then actually that will help draw those investors to you. And so first of all, I want to go and find a few opportunities, and we're going to do the same trick as pop a location in the chat. So anybody that's kind of got a particular location they want to go and search, pop it in the chat, and I'm going to use that as the example for today. The next bit I want to sort of talk about is then how we can build the confidence around the site that we've looked at. So how can we explain to the investors the important things to know about this particular property, typically about values, other things that have happened nearby, so you can really build this confidence that the scheme I'm going to put forward is going to get the consent, it's going to get delivered, it's going to get sold at the price that I say it's going to get sold for. And I suppose the final bit then is also just a kind of a thought process about where you might find other investors and how you might build credibility around that. And we actually had sort of an interesting story around raising private finance from many years ago, which was sort of back in about 2007. We were sort of looking at the UK property market and just feeling like it was very overheated. So we started looking overseas, and as part of that, we found a particular hotel actually way over in Eastern Europe that we were kind of interested in. And actually then thought, well, actually it's a bit big for us. And so we decided to try and raise some private finance off the back of that. And we reached out to some local surveyors that we knew really well, and they put us in touch with some other kind of developers actually that then were prepared to invest with us. And actually what I wanted to kind of try to show you today is how we can expand that out, take that same principle. Back in the days, we struggled to find opportunities. We ended up looking overseas and doing all this kind of stuff. And then trying to find investors was very difficult. And so it was kind of word of mouth and this sort of stuff. But actually, there's very simple tricks to go and find who the locally active investors are, who the locally active developers are, who those people are going to understand what it is you're putting forward, and therefore probably prepared to write a check on some sensible terms with you to go and move forward in effect. So really what I would like to do is to pick up a location. So Glenn has popped in Gloucester into the chat. So let's just go off and have a look at Gloucester as the example. So let's just pop this into here. So this is the elite system here. For those of you that have noticed, we've had a little update over the weekend where we now have a full screen search, which is kind of quite exciting, and lots of kind of cool stuff we can do with that. I'm just going to disable that for the moment, because what I want to do to start with is I want to understand Gloucester. I want to kind of understand the area. So what I'm going to do to start with is put on the average residential values and just see whereabouts I want to search. When I start pitching to my investors and I start saying I'm going to do a commercial conversion of class MA to residential, something like that, I want to know that I'm pitching that in a really good part of town. I'm not going to come back and say, oh yeah, Paul, you put this scheme forward, but actually it's the worst part of Gloucester that you're looking at. The other thing that's important as part of that is to know that the values are high enough to make conversions stack up. So I'm going to find the right sort of opportunities. So what I can see across Gloucester is that sort of central Gloucester, sort of some of these numbers are pretty weak when you think about sort of new build costs across most of the country now, probably pushing up towards £200 a foot. Having average sales prices across these neighbourhoods down here are really going to mean that the values aren't particularly strong and therefore not going to be able to support a conversion. And sort of some of these places further down to sort of the southeast, there's sort of a £400 a foot nearly. Some of these places sort of further southeast of Gloucester, but let's kind of stick with Gloucester for now. So I'm going to sort of try and search around some of these areas around here. I think is kind of where my target area is going to be. So in essence, there's some very simple things we can do, and I can use the class MA strategy overlay. And sort of what I'll quickly see, hopefully, is sort of very few opportunities in the area I want to go and search actually, which is slightly frustrating. Let's go and have a look down here and see what we find here. So a little shop there, another shop on the corner there. Kind of interesting. So this is bring a little appraisal, kind of giving me an understanding of what this particular property might have in store for me in effect. So it's a 1,500 square foot shop. Got sales price about £280 a foot in that area. It's allowed £100 a foot conversion cost, and sort of assuming about £95 a foot purchase price. I suppose part of the reason I'm showing you this is actually what I want to create as part of the package for the investor is that there's a kind of win-win situation for everybody as part of this. And so by finding sites that have got some sensible returns in them, in the case of this sort of 44% return on cost, what that's allowing me to do is to put forward a sensible appraisal that says actually we're going to make 25-30% return on cost on this particular scheme. And actually we might make a little bit more than that because I'm going to share some of that extra upside, some of that difference between maybe 25% and 44%, which is the return on cost here. I'm going to share a little bit of that with the owner of the site. So I'm going to pay a little bit more than this building's worth. So here it's saying it's worth about 140,000. And I might share another 25,000, something like that, out of that extra profit, if you like, with that owner. The reason they're going to do that is that actually what that will allow me to do is to buy that property under option. So I'm going to borrow that money for shorter periods of time from the investor. It's going to reduce the amount of interest I'm going to have to pay, or the split I'm going to have to pay to that investor as part of it. It means that as soon as we cash in that option, we'll know an awful lot more about the building than we do now. We can do a load of surveys in the meantime. We'll have our planning consent in place. There's no question marks over whether I'm going to get, in the case of this, 3 flats or 5 flats or whatever that might be, whether I can get an extension or not. At the point at which I buy that site and I cash that option in at a slightly higher price than existing use value, existing value of that particular building, it's all completely clear. The investor then puts their money in at that point, and at that point, it's all completely clear. So by taking that approach where I share that uplift with the owner, I can buy it under option. I can then really de-risk that project for the investor because I've got a planning permission in place. I know exactly what I've got to go and do. I've probably even done some of the surveys as part of that to go and get my planning consent put in place. So it's a much neater package for that investor than otherwise. I'm not convinced that's the most exciting of opportunities in this area, but it does illustrate the point. Maybe this is kind of more, there's a 2,500 square foot office. Maybe that's kind of more interesting as a thing to look at. So again, it's sort of saying here it's worth about 60 quid a foot as an office building. It's a pretty poor office building actually. This is highlighting in effect, and that's really then where the opportunity is going to come from for me to be able to kind of convert. It's actually probably an old church that's now being used as an office in effect. So hopefully that's perhaps more interesting as part of the elite platform, so we can do large-scale letter campaigns to owners of these sorts of buildings where we have much bigger profits in them that we can then unlock in effect. And the sort of magic number is about 100 letters. Send 100 letters out, typically you'll close a deal off the back of 100 letters. So that was the first thing I wanted to bring to life. The second thing I wanted to kind of look at was then just looking at, well, where might I find some investors that kind of understand this particular local marketplace? If I need to buy an office in Gloucester, well, where are those offices that have been bought elsewhere? And kind of what's often not particularly clear actually is that the buildings that have sold that are in office use are bought by people that understand offices. So I want to go forward to those people and say, well, would you like to come and invest with me on this particular building over here? I'm going to take this office, I'm going to convert it under Class MA to residential. Then, of course, if they've bought offices elsewhere, they'll understand that underlying office market. So within our elite platform, I can go off and I can just say, well, just show me all the offices that have sold maybe in the last couple of years across Gloucester, and just a few that have sold. So here's a bunch of properties that have sold within that. So there's a property there that's sold, 175 Bristol Road, Gloucester, similar sort of size, 2,000 square feet, sort of £280,000 that's sold for. So I can sort of look across various properties across the area that I'm looking at and just see where those properties are kind of similar to the one that I'm looking at, whether that's sort of a town centre office building like this sort of thing, where we've got a small unit, 800 square feet for 185,000 that's sold there, or indeed perhaps different size units like this, 3,500, 4,000 square feet, sold for £110 a foot. Now, what's perhaps also interesting as part of that is that, so what we know off the back of that is that those buildings sold on these dates. This one was sold in July 2020, just out of interest. What we can also understand then is obviously those owners then understand what these office buildings are about. They've gone off and bought them for a reason. They've been through the due diligence process of understanding what an office is. They probably understand how to let a building, possibly, and this sort of thing. So there's some useful stuff we can do. So firstly, if you want to go understand who owns that particular property. I can click on the property itself. It's showing me that this company here, Gloss Limited, whoever they are. Let's go find out who they are. This is a company that owns that particular property. They're a residence property management company. And in essence, what that's then showing me then is that they bought that in July 2020, and there's kind of lots of details around that particular company in effect. I can probably go off and have a look at the people behind the property and see who they are. So it's Chi Hung Yip, whoever that is. Maybe this may not be necessarily the best example of that, but it's giving me kind of that clear understanding of who owns these various properties. I can then build a little list of people I want to go and get in touch with to see if they want to go and back my my scheme going forward. So it's really bringing to life the fact that other people that have bought stuff that's similar to things I want to go and buy will understand that marketplace, and therefore I can build a list of those people and go and get in touch with them one by one. The second thing that perhaps is interesting, if I just remove this now and just kind of make life a little bit simpler for us, is then also to understand, well, the people that might want to invest in an office building and convert to residential are people that have been doing that elsewhere. So if I click into here, so this is our planning search in effect. What I want to use this for is I want to go off and do a search across all the planning portal for Gloucester for basically offices. So where do I see an office building that's changed, that's been bought and had a planning application put in on it that talks about offices? The reason I'm interested in that, apologies, 2 seconds, let me get rid of that for you. Here we go, apologies. Just show you this. So this is showing me, for example, over here, the proposed alterations for offices, demolition of the office building, put a new office building in place, change of use from office to 12 flats. And of course, what that's then showing me on the right-hand side then is the title of that property sits on and who the owners of that property are. So again, from this, I can get a list of people that again are going to be interested in investing in offices in the area that I'm looking at in effect. In the case of these last two, they actually were bought in the last couple of years too. So actually I can see they're quite, they've recently bought a property. And then in the case of Room Business Albion Chambers Limited, they spent 500 grand on a property, which then they submitted a change of use to go and convert that into flats going forward. So of course, a conversation with them would be very interesting to say, well, actually, I want to go and buy this other office building and convert it to residential. Would you be interested in investing in that? The chances are they'll understand that quite happily. Thanks very much. So just a few ways to find some other investors to look at off the back of that, as I'm putting that presentation forward to those investors, looking at those other buildings that have sold, looking at the residential values across those areas too, so I can really build up a nice neat picture of what my sales values are, underpinned by the real comparables to understand exactly these are the properties that sold at these prices, and therefore my appraisal is absolutely robust. And then using those other tools to go and find out the people you should go and present those things to. One of the golden tricks of getting through to those investors is to talk to those investors about buildings they already own. So if I want to go and get in touch with one of those investors that I've just highlighted, so if I want to go and get in touch with Room Business Albion Chambers Limited, what I'll do is I'll go and Google that company or just go and find a phone number for them. Off the back of that, if I ring through and say to them, I want to go and speak to the property director or pick a director off the company's house entry for that property, and say to them, I want to speak to them about 111 Eastgate Street, Gloucester. What will happen is you'll typically get through to that person because they won't know what the call is regarding, and you're quoting to them one of their own properties. So of course they will typically answer the phone as part of that. So a very quick way to go and get in touch with those people. Indeed, on the far right hand side, we'll have details of the fact they use AC Planning Solutions Limited. So actually a phone call to Andrew Case to try and get you introduced to that owner could also get you through there as well. So a number of little tricks to get you through to the owners of these buildings that then are likely to want to invest with you on your schemes. So for anybody that's interested, we have a number of packages, a number of ways of finding opportunities, obviously assessing them. I've been using that Elite Plus system as part of that with the Class M8 overlay, sort of strategy overlay, if you like, which forms part of the commercial conversions package. We do have an offer on at the moment. So it's the start of our March offer, which runs until the 25th of March, where you can save 20% on our Elite system. And indeed, 10 or 20% off the Elite Plus and Elite Max systems. What I promised earlier on is that if anyone would like a follow-up call either with Market Echo Academy, or indeed if you'd like to know more about Nimbus Maps, I've just launched a quick poll. So if the first question is if you'd like to know more about Nimbus, and obviously to benefit from our March sale. Indeed, the second question, if you'd like a follow-up call with Market Echo Academy, then that second question is for you. We're just going to take a very short break, and back in 2 minutes, and we'll come back and answer some questions for you just then. Fabulous. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move to our Q&A session. If anybody has a question they would like to ask, then what we'd like to ask you to do is to open up your control panel for Zoom. What you'll find on the control panel is a little raise hand button. If you click that raise hand button for us, then we'll bring you up here and we'll get you to unmute yourself and to ask your question of us, and we'll then answer that question for you live, hopefully. So we have Alex has raised their hand. Let me see if we can bring Alex up. Hi, Alex.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yes, very well, thank you. Very well.
Yeah, so my question is to you, Mark. I really love your whole approach, about approaching things with pretty much, I think I could underpin what you're saying by having purpose behind how you approach things, and that way you inspire people from their heart to then want to interact with you. And I've been on my own journey, quite extensively in the last few years to try and kind of figure all that out myself. And I think I also completely agree with you that humility is one of the kind of key factors to, conveying that purpose in your heart, if you like. So I found, at least recently anyway, and I wanted to ask you if you agree, that I think I'm kind of finding out that the key to humility is being humble, or finding humility in those situations where you have every right not to be humble, or you don't want to be humble. And I think I've found that when I've been doing that things have been happening that I wouldn't expect to happen in my life. And I wondered what you thought of that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The strongest grip is the open hand. So leading with openness, caring, and you can't fake that. Either that's your raison d'etre or it isn't. But trying to help people, and if that leads to another conversation, and somebody decides to buy your product or invest in you, then that's absolutely great. But that humility, it puts you on a level playing field with everybody you speak to. Nobody wants to stand on a pedestal, and nobody wants to drop in a trough. Everybody can learn, and I think that philosophy of entering into any discussion where you'll leave some value and hopefully you'll take away a couple of golden nuggets as well. It just creates bonds that remain firm for, well, in some cases for decades and life. Can it be taught? Can it be learned? Absolutely it can. I think the joy of seeing somebody succeed outwith of their wildest potential, or just offering some support and advice and seeing people take that and move to the next level, it's incredibly humbling and enjoyable. So well, it's a bit of a ramble really, but humility, that's exactly where it starts, and that's why we bring in partners like Nimbus and our solicitors and tax advisors, because we can't do it all. We absolutely can't do it all. We rise and fall together. We're great at coordinating, if you like, with the conductor of the orchestra, but those principal parts, absolutely everybody plays a role, and that's really gratifying for the whole team.
Yeah, as they say, a rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you. That was all I had to say.
Thank you, Alex. Really appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. So we've got no more questions in the chat. I'm sort of equally conscious of time, Mark, as well. We sort of set ourselves out an hour and a half. We've got 3 minutes left. We have got time just for one more question. Anybody's got anything else? Failing that, I think all that really is left for me to do is to firstly to thank you, Mark, for a great presentation today. Much appreciated. It's been great fun having you here.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. I mean, we use Nimbus on a day-to-day basis as well, and it supports that underlying due diligence. So thank you for inviting me to share a few thoughts on other areas that we look at. Thank you.
Having you. And then finally, thank you to you all for watching today. Hope it's been useful. We've certainly had fun. I've been Paul Davis. We've been Nimbus Maps. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best. Bye for now.